Standing at 20,300 feet, Alaska's Mount McKinley is the highest peak in North America.
The route went very well. We all climbed very well together, and we all climbed technically fantastic sections of mountain.
May 1999. Expert mountain climbers Nigel Vardy, Anthony Hollingshead, and Steve Ball are camped high up Mount McKinley, preparing for an assault on the summit.
The final camp was at 16,400 feet, which is 4,000 feet below the summit.
This was the only place available to camp. There was another place available about 1,000 foot higher, but it was very, very exposed. If the weather had come in, we would have been forced off the mountain immediately.
With over 4,000 feet to climb and 4,000 feet to descend in a day, we knew the summit day was going to be very, very tough.
Summit day arrives. The team sets off.
We got into some difficulties straight away, which sopped up some time.
Takes a lot out of your body. The cold temperatures which you've got there, just because McKinley's just below the Arctic Circle, are very extreme, very, very tiring, very demanding.
When we topped out onto the summit plateau, an area called the football field, the cloud was coming in low across the summit, and there was a wind kicking up.
And we got to within a few hundred yards of the summit, and the weather started to close on us. High winds started to blow ice and snow across the summit plain, which really stings you in the face and eyes. But we were so close, and we put so much effort in that we just didn't want to turn back and go back down all those 4,000 feet without actually accomplishing the summit.
The winds built up to a sort of 50 mile an hour, which was taking a lot of energy out of you. It really was quite bitter. And the temperatures were dropping as well, which was just all taking its toll on our bodies. We decided that we'd actually move into and take some shelter in a crevasse.
It wasn't big enough to fit all of us in to start with, so Nigel and Anthony started to open the hole up just to make it big enough for the three of us for the night.
When it's that cold, down into the minus 50s, minus 60s, you don't feel the cold like you think you would, because you've gone past shivering and your body is getting to the point of, shall we say, giving up.
When we eventually got into the hole, my body temperature cooled quite considerably. My teeth were chattering and I was shivering.
Dr. Paul Auerbach is an expert in wilderness medicine.
Steve's shivering is a sign that he's becoming hypothermic. His body's beginning to generate involuntary muscle activity, and as his muscles begin to contract, that generates heat, which is circulated to his vital core organs. So by contracting his muscle tissue, he's actually generating heat for his core.
The climbers have a radio, but the storm has prevented them from using it until now. Nigel begins to make a desperate call for help. Then, the unthinkable happens.
I couldn't believe how guilty I felt that we'd lost the only means of communication that we had with the outside world. But it soon became very obvious that my hands were so badly frostbitten, in fact much worse than I thought. I started to walk down to the radio, but my feet weren't working very well, and I fell straight over and slipped on the ice and snow down towards the radio, and quite miraculously stopped right next to it. But from that point I couldn't get it to work again.
Night falls on Mount McKinley. Wind chill drives the temperature down to minus 60 degrees. As the temperature drops, so does the team's chance of survival.
Steve was in the worst condition of the three of us that evening. He had gone into severe hypothermia and was drifting in and out of consciousness.
Anthony said I was ranting on about tomato sauce or tomato soup, I think it was, my dislike for it.
Steve ranting is a very serious warning sign of hypothermia, which is altered mental status. As his brain cools, he becomes confused, then agitated, and he might actually hallucinate. His friends should do everything they can to keep him calm and try and keep him from getting any colder or actually to warm him up.
Myself and Tony hugged him from both sides to try and keep him warm as best we could. We drifted in and out of sleep and consciousness all night with the cold.
Next morning, we pulled out of the hole, and I was all for going back up onto the summit. I didn't realise at that time that Nigel was in a bit of a state.
Nigel and Anthony succeed in slowing down Steve's heat loss, but now Nigel's condition is worsened.
Steve, being the coldest member in the night, made a miraculous recovery by morning, really. And I was now the weakest of the three of us.
Nigel had got frostbite on his nose, which basically had spread into his face, really, and underneath his eyes, he had all sort of swollen up, and it was very, very difficult for him to see, and was forcing his eyes shut.
We were all alone on the mountain. We didn't know quite how or when or if they could rescue us at all. We started to walk out, but it soon became obvious that my feet were just terribly frostbitten. I was having real problems walking.
Once the frostbite sets in, other things go wrong as well. The whole system becomes depressed. You don't feel like going on. Your morale's very low. So it was important to get him down as fast as we can, we thought.
When someone becomes hypothermic, the blood is shunted from the peripheral tissues to the core to preserve internal body heat. So now that periphery is very much prone to the actual freezing of tissues or frostbite. That can be a minor injury in which someone can recover completely, all the way to a very severe injury in which the tissue is so severely damaged that an amputation becomes necessary.
Nigel just couldn't see where he was putting his feet, so he was stumbling, he'd be falling over.
So we're heading for some rocks for shelter because the wind was getting a little bit stronger again at this time.
Wind chill increases the rate of heat loss from the body. These men are in an extreme danger zone. As the wind chill and the cold environment saps them of their strength and their ability to reason, the decisions that they make are going to become more difficult and their lives become increasingly at risk.
I can remember seeing Steve and Tony talking about something, and I was plonked down.
It was decided that I was the fittest of the climbers and probably technically the better climber, and then I should descend alone, look for help.
Steve set off, it was about 1 o'clock.
I can remember seeing Steve walking away and thinking for a few seconds, why are you going, Steve? Where are you off?
I think I descended about 1,000 feet. I decided to take a shortcut and go straight down this snow and ice slope. I started to slide down the slope. Sometimes I was in contact with the slope, sometimes I was airborne. My left leg below the knee just snapped, and about 10-20 yards further down, my right leg caught some rocks and that too snapped. It was some time before I eventually came to rest. I was in a daze for a minute or two. I was thankful to still be alive, and I looked at my legs, saw that they were both broken. The bone had come right through the skin and it was bleeding.
This adds an extreme insult to Steve's injury. Laying there, unable to move or help himself, he's going to become very cold, and the risk for frostbite is going to be multiplied enormously. Unless he can get help soon, he's going to die.
We didn't know whether Steve had made it or whether he had raised an alarm. You have to think positively all the time.
I was now off route. I knew that no other climbers would be climbing this way. I got onto the rucksack, I curled up into fetal position just to try and conserve energy and keep myself as warm as possible.
One of the hardest things to bear was the fact that we kept hearing helicopters circling below us. We didn't know whether they were looking for us or not, and yet they always seemed so close.
It was late afternoon now, and I heard the helicopters go and no plane activity for some while. I knew that rescue attempts had either succeeded with Nigel and Anthony and they'd called them off for me, or they didn't know I was in danger.
It got to sort of stage at sort of 6 o'clock. We were thinking, well, there's not many rescue parties which should consider setting out at this time. We really had little hope of anything other than another night on the mountain.
It's been 24 hours since Steve went for help, 48 since they've been stranded high up Mount McKinley. Anthony, Nigel, and Steve are dying by degrees.
We saw a helicopter flying the opposite direction away from us, but it turned around.
To see the rescue helicopter coming towards you is just an overwhelming experience. When I was dropped off at base camp, all the rangers kept asking me was, "Where's your third man?" And all I could say was that he's still on the mountain.
I was wondering if I was ever going to get found, and it was some time after dawn when I lost it and I fell asleep. I think it was this period when I was frozen.
But then, only moments before all hope is lost, an incredible sight.
They'd seen me as a dot in the distance and came to investigate. The rescue parties had been out earlier on with spotter planes, and they were expecting to find a corpse. I do remember the helicopter arriving and the blades whirling around and kicking up a lot of wind. After that, I don't really remember anything until I landed in hospital.
The men survived their encounter with the mountain, but they paid the price.
I still have some parts of my fingers left, and with those, I now climb regularly. I do have to be very careful because of the cold and damage to the skin grafts.
As you can see, everything's gone. This one's gone halfway through the palm, and that's all fingers and thumbs. I lost the left leg below knee eventually, but the bone must have been damaged with frost and that wasn't mending. So months later, we eventually opted to amputate. And I lost my right foot and a little bit of skin off my nose as well.
It's a case that you accept the risks when you take on the sport as a hobby, and that's it.
I will keep climbing. It's made me more determined to climb than I ever have, and I shall climb to the end of my life.